Yuk Chi, great to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And I am very excited to learn a little bit more about what you're doing, and share it with the folks that follow us as well. Because you guys are building a really cool business and you've got a really fascinating background. So to start, I'd love to just hear the story from you. Why'd you get into this business and what are you guys doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the initial headline, Short is building the first fintech for the space industry. We're building the fundamental underwriting and information infrastructure to actually enable better and safer engineering, and also enable all the subsequent financial products that should exist with an industry and an economy as advanced as space. So, that goes to insurance, that goes to private credit and debt lending, and really, to bring in the capital and to bring in the risk assurance needed to power the next generation and the next evolution of human space flight. So I started my career as an army engineer. I served at the Singapore Army as a logistics officer in an engineering battalion, primarily working on armored vehicles. So primarily mechanical and electrical systems for main battle tanks, IFVs, APCs, pretty much anything with tracks and guns. And so I got to live out every little boy's dream. I got to work on tanks every single day with very very smart people, and it was awesome. I loved my time in this in the army. All good things must come to an end. And so I left the military and I went to law school. I specialized in space law because actually we just celebrated 10 years since SpaceX successfully landed Falcon 9 for the first time. It was December 21st, 2015. And I remember because I was in the military and I remember watching it live, right, from the other side of the world. And when I remember seeing that and thinking to myself, well, one, there's a whole universe out there that is so much grander than that I had any experience dealing with, right? I was just basically a grunt, and there's this whole wide universe out there that I haven't even gotten a chance to go check out, and it appeared to be growing and advancing at such a rapid pace that I was genuinely worried that I might have missed the train. But I also remember making a decision that I really want to join the space industry because, well, I mean, when you watch rocket land for the first time, that's that leaves an impression. And so I went to law school and I specialized in space law. And so space law as a subfield of international law primarily concerns lawyers and governments. And so I did government advisory work for a little while after graduating. I worked with a couple of governments in developing nations, a couple of NGOs. I think the most notable thing that I did was I led a project on behalf of both my law firm and an NGO, sort of in partnership to develop a study for the UN. And that culminated with me actually getting to give a speech at the UN to the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. And I think I was the youngest lawyer to ever actually address the full chamber. And I think that record still stands. I was 25. And so yeah, I know. So so I did that for a little while, but I mean, I didn't get into the space industry, or I didn't want to join the space industry just to go shuffle papers, right? I loved working with technology. I picked that up when I was in the military. I still had that itch at the back of my skull, and so first chance I got, I joined a satellite company as a mission manager, and a mission manager's role is really all about just getting the satellite out the door, right? And so a big part of that is coordinating and managing the actual engineering operations, making sure that everybody's pulling in the same direction. But then it's also a lot of paperwork. The pile of papers needed to launch a satellite is usually taller than the satellite itself. And so that also became my problem, right? Is kind of it was a situation of, oh, you're a lawyer, right? Can you do this? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I could figure it out. And so, that became my role. I had to, work on regulatory compliance, obviously, licensing, customer requests, and so interfacing with customers and preparing technical briefings. On one occasion, I had to try and get us insurance, and so that was kind of where the whole insurance thing came from.
Sure.
And it was a deeply frustrating experience. I will say that I loved my job, but it was really just sort of laborious, right? Working day in, day out in, Excel and Jira and all these different disparate tools. It's a tale as old as time. It was just so fragmented and,
Sure.
requires a human being to sort of stitch all of it together. And, when that happens, there's obviously you create room for mistakes, you create room for a lot of extra duplicative effort and, wasted time and money. And so, that's really why I decided to build Shorter and we set out on doing what we do today, right? Because I saw the problem firsthand. The fact that there is no specialized sort of comprehensive systems engineering and program management tool for the space industry to actually build stuff, right? Like it's cobbled together and it's cobbled together from a bunch of other solutions designed for other industries because that's the best that we have. But also, I saw the wider sort of implications of that problem. When I tried to apply for insurance, I had to collect up all this fragmented data, and it kept shifting day to day, and so it was a huge pain to actually get everything sort of compiled into a technical briefing for the insurers. And so, that was an actual delay, right? It was
Yeah.
actually pushed our mission timelines back. And if you don't, well, specifically because we are a British company, um, getting insurance was a regulatory requirement. And so if we didn't get insurance, we would have gotten barred from flying. And so that's the other big thing, right? Like it's an actual showstopper. So there's that. And then so the macro strategic level problem is that a lack of insurance indicates a general lack of maturity in the entire industry, and that means that there you won't be able to attract as much capital as you actually need, and so there's a missing middle in the space industry today where lending and credit just does not really exist, and so what that then leads to is the fact that the entire industry is starved for capital, and because it's starved for capital, it starts making bad decisions, much like a starving man that or a man dying of thirst, thinks that it's a good idea to start drinking seawater. I see a
Yeah.
lot of short-term thinking proliferate in the industry because of a overall desire to cut costs, right? Ironically, we're not investing enough in the long-term success of missions, and we're just sort of flying by the seat of our pants. And a lot of it, I think, is directly attributable to the fact that there's just not enough money available. And so that's a very sort of long, rambling overview of everything, but that's why I want to build Shorter. I lived the problem firsthand, and I understood it very well from the micro level perspective. But I saw the macro level implications of what my problem represented as a systemic issue for the entire industry.
Um, it's fascinating, and thank you for the background. As someone who is a bit of an outsider in the space industry, like most people in the world, my question for you is how many participants are there now? Because historically, I think a lot of the problems that you are now solving probably weren't a big deal when it was just a few governments participating, right? They would get their funding
Mhm.
from our tax dollars, they would write their own systems and have their own processes. And now you get private companies entering the space realm in much greater droves. Some of them have massive funding from the world's richest people, not all of them. So give me an update just on what the private space industry looks like now.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's probably over 1,000 satellite manufacturers at this point. Of different at different levels of maturity at different levels of scale. The total supply chain numbers in the thousand, right? Plural. Because a lot of folks don't necessarily build everything in-house anymore, right? There's room for specialization, and so you've got component vendors, and this is actually something that sort of has developed over the last 50 or so years, right? Like NASA has never built everything in-house. They
Sure.
usually procure certain components, they build certain components in-house, and then they procure everything else. And so that ecosystem has sort of grown up over the last 50 or so years, and now it's really starting to explode. And so there's a whole universe out there of private companies attempting to do all kinds of different interesting things. And a lot of them are directly supportive of those same government missions that you've talked about, right? NASA doesn't build everything in-house anymore. In fact, they actually subcontract and outsource a lot of this stuff, because it makes a lot more sense for NASA to further the science and to put out a
Sure.
spec, get somebody else to go build a thing, and then they fly the thing and go do interesting things for that thing, right? So there's only really two NASA centers that still build stuff, that's really really bespoke, and they still don't do it entirely in isolation, right? They obviously have an army of commercial contractors supporting them. So NASA got a Space Flight Center, and then NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, which is technically not a NASA center, it's actually a federally funded R&D center, and it's owned by Caltech. But yeah, so there's a lot of government missions out there that now rely on the commercial industry, and the commercial industry has started growing, both to support government applications as well as emerging commercial applications. And there's this whole universe of, all this is still, a lot of it is still space for Earth, right? It's things that we
Yeah.
launch into space in support of Earth-based and terrestrial sort of industries. But there's also an emerging field of space for space, right? So things like in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, things like orbital refueling, things like non-Earth imaging, like all these applications of space for other components of the space industry to support the growth of the overall sector, but also start casting. To start casting our influence further out, right? When we talk about exolunar application, that's more or less going to be space for space.
Sure. And so the industry is not only just growing in terms of dollars and participants, but there's also more variation being introduced, right? More
Yes.
niches of the industry that are emerging every day. And I would suspect you can confirm that your background as both a lawyer and engineer, right, gives you some vantage point to see the connective tissue across all those different sectors, right? Whether you are a contract manufacturer developing a specific satellite component, whether you're trying to launch something into space yourself, whether you're participating in the research side of this, there's probably certain regulations and processes that you need to make sure you're diligently following. And then there's also just some ecosystem wide benefits to being more insurance ready, being more capital ready, having access to those basic glues and, fuels that drive economic growth across any other industry.
You're absolutely right. So I mean, in terms of my own background, right? Like I've always been like a systems thinker. That was something that was sort of important to me, by the military, right? To think in a much more strategic fashion. Actually, a lot of law is also, if you think about systems thinking, right?
Mhm.
I specifically specialized in public law, so that was constitutional law and international public law, and a lot of it is, yeah, I mean, it's basically a giant system, right? There's different pieces and different subspecialties, but they all fit together for a cohesive whole. And when they don't fit together so well, that causes, problems to compound, and it flows upwards. So the systems level thinking approach has helped immensely. I mean, obviously, a lot of space is in around systems. Actually, the field of systems engineering itself as a discipline was invented by NASA in I think the 70s, basically to account for the complexity of the systems that they were developing, right? Because you've got,
Sure.
100,000 components, and none of them can fail, right? Or, a
Yeah.
handful of them can fail, and that's it. And it's not a percentage thing. It's very, very specific redundancies are allowed, to fail. So, the systems level thinking approach has helped, but also, I think an understanding of the history of the world and the history of other economies. So the analogy I like to use is shipping. Shipping and maritime trade and maritime exploration, around the turn of the 17th century. Well, I guess, sorry, 17th century, 18th century. I actually don't.
1700s?
Well, no, actually, the late 1600s turning into
Sure.
1700s. So I think that's the turn of the 18th century, right? Like it starts at the beginning rather than the end. Anyway,
Either way, we're all same page here. Yeah.
1689 is the specific
Okay.
year that I'm thinking about, right? Because in 1689, there's a low coffee house in London that was founded, and it became a very, very popular watering hole with the merchants and the mariners of the time, right? And so this coffee house was a regular gathering spot for you know the sailors that were coming in and out of London. And if you think about the time period, the Dutch and British East India companies have just been established, and they're starting to expand out. They're starting to establish trade routes to the New World and to Africa and to the Far East, and you know we're starting to see maritime trade, even though it's existed as a concept for hundreds of years prior. We're starting to see it sort of grow and globalize for the first time, right? It's starting to hit sort of an industrial scale. But ultimately, it was still a really, really challenging prospect to finance because at the time, you only really had a couple of sources of capital, right? It was the church, the monarchy, or just super rich people, right? And that's
Yeah.
it. It's fundamentally a patronage system. If you want to launch a voyage and you want to cast off for riches and glory, you need the backing of somebody. You need the backing of somebody's uncle. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. And then 1689, these merchants and mariners, they're gathering in this little coffee house. And well, my dad was a Navy sailor. And so I know these guys better than I think a lot of folks. Navy the sailors are a rough bunch, right? So how do they entertain
Sure.
themselves? Well, they start betting. What do they bet on? They bet on whom amongst them is going to die on the next voyage. And so, they start forming death pools. And it's all about who's going to make it back? Are they going to hit a storm? Are they going to run aground? Like what's and these guys, it makes sense because these guys know better than anybody what the risk is, right? They
Yeah.
they see each other coming in and out, day in, day out. They know, oh, Bob's a moron. He ran his ship into the dock last week. He's probably going to screw this next one up. Or
Yeah.
Jack is a fantastic navigator. He can navigate the hell out of a storm. And so these guys will start making these bets, and they start opening up the death pools to Joe Schmoes walking past on the street, and the Joe Schmoes obviously join in, and they lose everything. Right now, it's fun for a time, and these guys they get wise. They realize actually there's a lot more money to be made betting on each other's success rather than against each other. And so what they do is they start pooling capital, right? They take these death pools and they turn them into the world's first mutual funds. They start insuring and underwriting, the journeys of their peers, and those become the world's first maritime insurance policies. And over time, this coffee house becomes known for being a center of both really good information on which these sorts of contracts can be underwritten, as well as the availability of capital. Right, it literally attracts capital in through the door to bet on the success of these ships. And then around this coffee house in the city of London forms the London financial sector, right? It literally gives birth to this entire industry. And by the way, the name of that coffee house was Lloyd's. That's how
No way.
Lloyd's, yeah, that's how Lloyd's got started. Lloyd's was founded by a man named Edward Lloyd, who was not an insurance guy. He was not a finance guy. He was a coffee house owner. And Lloyd's List, which was the periodical newsletter that Edward Lloyd put together to distribute news related to the shipping world, is still one of the longest running publications and still one of the best sources for maritime information in the world. It is still running 300 something years later. And so look at what I guess insurance and so the quantification of risk did for shipping, right? I think we
Yeah.
are very much at that early phase today with space. We are starting to quantify the risk in a sort of systematic way at scale for the very first time. And what insurance did for shipping, what Lloyd's did for shipping, is what I believe insurance will do for space and what Charter is going to do for space as a whole as well.
Wow. So you are basically you've started a coffee house here in another fashion.
Oh yeah.
But that becomes the glue. Okay. What a story. And looking at, I guess, now where you guys play in the ecosystem and the value that you can provide. My understanding, because we've worked together for a few years, right? And tell me if this is wrong, is that
Mhm.
you started off building what was essentially a little bit more of a SaaS platform and operating system for space companies and really pivoted not that you're ignoring the SaaS side of it now, but brought insurance to the top of the stack as a key unlock. So with that story you just told, I think I understand why, but tell me about your rationale and why you see that as being such a valuable thing for your customers.
Well, the thing that made Lloyd's work was that it was a hub, it was a nexus for information, right? These guys
Yeah.
came in, day out, they traded stories, and that's what enabled them to start pricing the risk a lot more accurately, right? People came
Hmm.
and gave their information and learned things in exchange, and it was an open and verifiable exchange. And so, when I wanted to solve this problem to begin with, obviously, one, I wanted to solve a problem that was very sort of near and dear to me, and that was the entire issue with all this fragmented data and all these fragmented workflows. But the wider thing that occurred to me was that, well, if all this information is locked up and nobody has a comprehensive sort of overview of what is going on, it's impossible to actually determine and price the risk, right? Because how can you price the risk of something that you don't have a full picture of? It's just
Yeah.
you're always going to be dealing with an unknown number of unknowns, and that
Sure.
obviously introduces a tremendous amount of uncertainty, which introduces variability, and with that variability, the variability is what kills you, right? And
Yeah.
so I knew that from the very beginning, the data has to come from the manufacturer because I was at a manufacturer. I knew that we're not just going to hand the data over. Like, God knows what you're gonna do with that, right? Like, and
Totally.
the safest thing to do is just to not hand it over. And so the question was, how do you go out and gather that data? Well, you know, when I was compiling the technical briefing for the insurance companies that I was trying to communicate with, I was having to plumb the depths of all of my different, various code repos, our Excel files, our Jira tickets. Like, I was having to extract and pull all that information out manually, and this was stuff that I was dealing with day to day. And I had to compile it into a big report, and I had to try and make it make sense, right? I had to make it human readable, and so it occurred to me that the insurance guys cared about all the exact same things that I was dealing with day to day. So wouldn't it be neat if there was just some automatic way to catalog and structure all this data where it already lives, and also to verify, at point of input that it was accurate and that it was correct, or at least that it was, that I didn't fudge the numbers.
Sure.
Would it be neat if there was some way to speed up this entire process and to streamline it with well, by automating it. And that's essentially why we started with the SaaS, because I wanted to capture data at point of input from the source. And the sources are the engineers themselves, right? Because they're the ones actually handling the hardware, they're the ones actually testing it, they're the ones actually doing the work. And they're also the biggest source of risk, right? Because
Sure.
whenever you introduce human beings into any sort of equation, you introduce a level of uncertainty. And so being able to document that uncertainty is going to be key. And so we had to stop the SaaS thing because without the SaaS thing, there are no customers, there is no latent demand, there is no data. And so
Yeah.
as soon as we hit sort of a critical mass, both in terms of number of customers that we knew were interested, but also, in terms of, I guess, the robustness of the data set and the maturity of the software's ability to actually capture that data, that's when we could go to the insurance industry and say, hey, look, I know that this is the problem for us. I don't know if this is a problem for you, but logically speaking, if I can make it way, way easier for folks to apply for insurance, it should, in theory, benefit you guys. I had no idea about the sort of dynamics in the insurance market. Turns out the insurance market really, really needed this because they're basically also starved for customers. And so it turned out that we were actually solving a much bigger problem than I thought that we were, because we were unlocking a gap between sort of the latent demand in the industry and the supply from the insurance side that could not effectively that could not effectively
Sure.
be channeled towards customers. And so, yeah, that's both luck and planning, I guess.
Well, but it's also the beauty in, solving a problem where you're not really threatening any of the major incumbents. You're making all of their lives easier, right? The insurance
Hmm.
companies want the space companies to use you. The space companies want the insurance companies to use you. That's a great way to grow, right? When all of your customers want you to be plugged in with more organizations like them, that's a winning formula usually.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, as we achieve scale, it actually becomes better for everybody because it's the same thing that we see with auto insurance when more
Yeah.
people are, or auto, life, health, workman's comp, whatever, right? Like if you have more people bought into a risk pool, the overall price drops because you basically disaggregate the risk and you make it much, much cheaper. And so the more people you get insurance, the cheaper insurance becomes for everybody.
Yeah, I mean the analogy that will maybe resonate more with me and my audience here is, you look at the history of the startup and venture capital markets, right? Where it used to be much smaller amounts of money at much lower valuations because this whole, funding a computer company thing was so new, right?
Hmm.
And as we've grown, particularly in the post-COVID boom where everybody raised funds and everybody was getting funded, you suddenly saw people, there was both a healthier supply demand balance there that has developed, and also a much larger sample size of data for smart VCs as well as
Hmm.
lenders and whatnot to actually price in the risk of an early stage venture. And so it sounds like space is certainly well behind, but you're helping to fix that.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there's obviously a good amount of VC and equity funding available in space today. Not nearly enough. But yeah, like I mentioned, the big missing middle is that there is no debt market. There is no private credit available for these very, very capital intensive companies. And really, we think about space companies as being, like tech, which they are. But if anything, space companies are more like the traditional heavy industries that we've seen in the past. So aviation is obviously a really, really close analogy, right? And so when you look at, say, the airlines, no airline owns its own aircraft. All airlines lease their aircraft from, third-party financiers that buy the planes off of the factory floor, and then lease them out to various users, right? When you look at how much money goes into aircraft manufacturing revenues every single year, two-thirds of all dollars that go into buying new aircraft or buying aircraft in general come from lease financing, right? Well, lease or debt or financing, right?
Sure.
Only one
Right.
third is cash and equities. And so even then, one third can be cash and equities because it's backed in a 1-to-2 ratio by debt. And
Yeah.
so if you then sort of take that perspective and you look at space, everything is funded by equity. From a cost of capital standpoint, equity is the most expensive money that you'll ever get, and you're spending it on factory equipment. You're spending it on hardware. You really shouldn't be, right? You should be spending that money on R&D. And fundamentally, when VCs fund the companies, right, there's a reason why VCs love software. It's because you can fund primary R&D and then you can scale distribution. You're not actually there isn't a similar sort of hard capex,
Well,
and those turn out to be the most efficient companies, right? So then it's not, you need the correct instrument for the correct application. VC financing, VC funding, and equity funding is just not the correct instrument for a capex sort of asset heavy industry like space. It should be debt, but debt doesn't exist because insurance doesn't exist. You can't get a loan on something that isn't insured. And so
right.
that's the wider implication of what I see us doing. Well, one, we build the insurance market so that these guys actually qualify for credit, but also two, insurance is an interesting sort of benchmark for how to price a loan, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're
You're
trying to
pricing
think
risk
of
in a different manner, right? It's kind of the inverse of it.
bingo, that's exactly it.
Wow, fascinating. So essentially, your business started with this tip of a spear of let's give engineers a better operating system in these space companies to, you know, organize and process their day-to-day work, remove some of that red tape and giant stacks of paperwork that you used to deal with. And then through that work, you've gotten access to all this proprietary data that really didn't exist out there. Um, and you're using that to now essentially develop the first systems in existence for private, essentially actuarial quantification of risk associated with space missions, which should, in theory, unlock capital for the ecosystem to grow more efficiently.
Right? There's a company recently closed a lease financing deal for $200 million for two satellites, and we're personally in touch with a number of private credit funds that are all very interested in participating in this new space economy because they can all see the writing on the wall just as well as we can, right? They know
Yeah.
that space is exciting. And actually, one of our investors put it best. Um, I think there's a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines waiting to that wants to participate in space because space is a truly uncorrelated category of risk, right?
Yeah.
A hurricane strikes the coast of Florida and screws up a bunch of things. Space doesn't care. It doesn't affect anything in space, right? And so it is one of I think the last truly uncorrelated category of risk. But the problem is that the credit market doesn't know how to participate, can't really participate, but wants to. And so, if you broadly believe that space is going to grow as a sector, and you broadly believe that we're going to expand out, we're going to do more stuff in space, whether or not that's colonizing the moon, or we're just going to send up a lot more satellites to go do stuff for
A lot of data
folks on
centers on
Earth.
the moon being talked about nowadays.
Yeah. So if you believe in
Yeah.
that, right? If you believe in that, but you don't necessarily know, okay, so which data center company should I back? Who should I throw my money at? The best, I think, use case to index across the entire growth of the industry is to bet on financial services because no matter what any of these guys do, no matter who wins, they're gonna need money. They're gonna need insurance. And so,
Amen.
bet on financial services.
I love it. Yeah, it's been a winning formula in most industries, I guess.
It really has. Fintech is still
Yeah.
one of the top categories of investment for a reason.
Yeah, I think Mr. Lloyd in the coffee house probably made more money than most of the ship owners back in that time period you talked about, huh?
Yeah, well, there's a reason why we can't find out. We can't find too much information about his descendants these days. I think I tried looking. I have no idea what his family's ended up doing. But they have Lloyd's. They have a bank. They have God knows what else. And so I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Yeah. Presumably they've divested a bit from the coffee house space and are in more lucrative
Mm.
opportunities.
I should say so. Although the coffee at Lloyd's today is actually not bad.
I love it. All right. So your own journey. How long have you been working on this business?
I have been here for just over 4 years now, and I if uh, if all goes well and the stars align, I will be here for the next 40.
Good man. Um, are you comfortable sharing how much capital you've raised?
Actually, I think we might have to. We're going to make a bigger funding announcement relatively soon, so probably not just yet.
Well, stay tuned for that.
Yes, stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Do you find it to be exciting or difficult to raise in a space that so few people know anything about?
It's difficult for sure, right? And it's one of those things where if you talk about it to the wrong folks, right, the people who don't have a lot, who don't have an appreciation for the fact that history rhymes, then it's challenging. But what I will say is, if the highs are high and the lows are low. When I do talk to somebody who really gets it, and I find that we've been fortunate enough to raise from some very 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 small investors. Um, when the right audience gets it, and when the right audience gets it, it is a feeling like no other. It is because it's a there's a phrase in Latin, which is normally used in the context of contract law. But basically, the phrase is consensus ad idem, which means meeting of the minds, right? So it's normally used in contract law to describe the process of offer and acceptance, right? You guys come to the same understanding. But I find that it's a really good description as well of what a good conversation and a good fundraising conversation feels like because it almost feels like they have already settled on the consensus. You're just sort of bringing it to the forefront. Like these folks, through the many many years of experience dealing with financial markets, with technology, they understand the natural patterns that emerge, and then you present them a new fact pattern, right? Which is the same patterns emerging in a completely brand new sector that they've never thought about, space, right? Because I think a lot of folks get hung up on the space aspect of what we do. We are a fintech company. right? It is space is just another asset class to us. Now it's a very, very unique asset class, and it's, I think, hilariously underpriced. But it is just an asset class. And so if you can take one step back, abstract out the same patterns, and see how those patterns are manifested over the long arc of history across every other major sort of technology sector, then it suddenly makes sense. And honestly, there is no greater joy than talking to somebody who instantly gets that and it makes sense to them. Because at the very least, I know that I'm talking to somebody who has done the history homework. And as a student of history myself, I appreciate that immensely.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, you've been very generous with your time. I've taken up too much of it. But I will close with a quote of my own that came up, which is I've seen people using on social media. The you don't want to tell your grandkids you built B2B SaaS. And in a weird way, I think you're either disproving that or validating that because this is incredibly interesting, and what you're doing seems like it can have an immense impact on the world. So I'm honored to be a small partner in whatever you're doing and its long-term success.
I'm honored to have you along, Paul. And I think we are. I'm very much validating that. I don't see us as B2B SaaS, although it literally is, right? Um, but the way that I see it is, I like Isaac Newton's quote that if I have been able to see far, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. My entire career has been in logistics, has been in doing the deeply thankless work that forms the foundation for other people to see far. Right? I think it is genuinely the greatest privilege of my life. It is a tremendous honor that I get to play a small part in the fabric and the long story of human civilization. And I get to build the infrastructure upon which other people stand to see further. Right. I'm grateful for the chance to be the shoulders that people get to stand on.
That's right. I love it. Beautifully said. And in a similar fashion, this is the honor of what I do is being able to give people like you a better chance of succeeding long term. We do a lot of stuff that's pretty boring, but at the end of the day, zooming out to realize who's benefiting from it, the same way that space companies have more success when they can get insurance and funding and freedom from red tape, I think is true of startups that help space companies. So, it's an honor to be supporting you. I appreciate the time today. And if anybody sees this and wants to get in touch with you, we can include some social handles. If there's a newsletter or anything you want to plug, just let me know. We'll add that in too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. Uh, as at Astro Lawyer, so ASTROLAWYER. You can also reach me via our website. It's charter, CHARTER dot space, charter dot space.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again for the time today. Good luck continuing to develop the new frontier and make it all happen.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your time as well. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year.
Same to you.